Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is podcast episode 144, week 29 of the Drums of Autumn read-along. This week we're covering chapters 57 and 58. And the title I give it is Difficult Negotiations. And the summary goes something like this. With the help of young Ian and his friend Emily, works with her hands, Jamie agreed to offer a ceilidh to be hosted by the pretty woman with a whisky tasting. Claire became acquainted with the pretty woman and her granddaughter. The conversation began with Claire searching for the truth about the opal and soon revealed who the ghost was that saved her and his purpose in the past. The ceilidh was a hit, and no damage was done. Roger was likely going to be given to them in a few days. Brianna prevented a proposal from one of the male suitors. Brianna met a lord. An alliance was being forged. Inside the chapters. Chapter 57. A Shattered Smile. Jamie was hot and heavy in negotiation with the sachem for Roger's release for the past few days, even though no one admitted Roger was at the village. Jamie believed Roger was in the village or nearby. They had whiskey to exchange for him. The whiskey is a challenging offer to make because of the mayhem it could cause when the men drink it. The upside is the alcohol could be used to trade by the Mohawk if they feared drinking it. Young Ian was proving a great intelligencer by sharing hearth in the village. It turns out Roger was a hot commodity among the young women. More than one wanted to take him to their longhouse cubicle. Has the men's council any idea that some of the women are interested in Roger? I dinna ken why. Because if they knew, they'd give him to you for free. Jamie snorted at that, but gave me a reluctant lift of one eyebrow. Aye, maybe. I'll have Ian mention the matter among the young men. It canna hurt. Remember, discord in the other Mohawk village surrounding the priest is what brought them to this village to get a ruling. A unified tribe was very important to them. Jamie and Claire discussed the opal as an alternative offering to the whiskey. The response to the opal had been anger, and no one would touch Jamie while he held it. He wanted Claire to keep the gem for protection against harm. But why should I be in any danger? The thought was disquieting. The women had been cautious but not hostile, and the men of the village had largely ignored me. He frowned and looked down toward the village. From here, little was visible save the outer palisades, with trails of smoke drifting above them from the unseen longhouses beyond. I canna say, Sassenach, only that I've been a hunter, and I have been hunted. You ken how when something strange is near, the birds stop singing, and there's a stillness in the wood? He nodded toward the village, eyes fixed on the swirl of smoke, as though some shape might emerge from it. There is a stillness there. Something is happening that I canna see. I dinna think it is to do with us, and yet I am uneasy, he said abruptly, and I have lived too long to dismiss such a feeling. Young Ian agreed with the opinion that something else was going on in the village that had nothing to do with them. There had been a disagreement in the council house the night before, and Emily, Ian's interest, wouldn't tell him what it was. Emily, Jamie lifted one eyebrow and Ian grinned. That's what I call her for short, he said. Her own name's Wakio Teyes Noncha. It means works with her hands. She's a rare carver, is wee Emily. See what she's made for me. He reached into his pocket and proudly displayed a tiny otter carved in white soapstone. The animal stood alert, head up and ready for mischief. Just to look at it made me smile. My apologies if I mispronounced her name. That was a tough one. So I will call her Works with Her Hands, or Emily from here on out. Young Ian affirmed he and Emily like each other. Emily had the idea to have a whiskey sampling that night. Young Ian suggested a ceilidh to be hosted by the pretty woman and managed by Emily. "The pretty woman," he explained, wiping his running nose on his sleeve. "One woman of influence in the village. Has it in her power to decide what's done with captives. They call her the pretty woman, no matter what she looks like. So you can. It's to our advantage if Tuak Tunyan can be convinced the bargain we offer is a good one." "I suppose to a captive that's been freed, the woman would be beautiful regardless," Jamie said wryly. I see. Go ahead then. Can you fetch the whiskey by yourself?" Ian nodded and turned to go. Claire asked young Ian to ask Emily about the opal. Jamie and Claire wondered about whose bed he was sleeping in. The ceilidh began after dark with high-level council members. Jamie and young Ian sat with the sachem. Emily sat on the whiskey barrel. The rest of the women present did not take part in the tasting, only Emily. Claire could feel Roger's presence somewhere in the village and knew the burden of importance this gathering held. Claire marveled at the manner in which Works with Her Hands served the whiskey. She took it in her mouth and spat 3 mouthfuls in a cup as a way of portioning out the whiskey. Claire wondered how much was absorbed through the girl's mouth. A young boy came in looking ill. Claire could tell immediately he had a dislocated shoulder. She approached the wary mother and boy. I gestured to his mother, who hesitated, frowning at me. The boy made a small whimpering noise, and she pulled him away, holding him tight. With sudden inspiration, I pulled Nyaweni's amulet from my shirt. She wouldn't know whose it was, but might recognize what it was. She did. Her eyes widened at the sight of the tiny leather bag. The boy made no more noise, but I could see the sweat run down his hairless chest, clear in the firelight. I fumbled at the thong that held the pouch shut, digging inside for the rough blue stone. Pierre sans peur, Gabriel had called it, the fearless stone. I took the boy's good hand and pressed the stone firmly into his palm, folding his fingers around it. Je suis une sorcière, I said softly. C'est ma destin, là. Trust me, I thought. Don't be afraid, I smiled at him. The boy stared round-eyed at me. The 2 women at the hearth exchanged a look, then as one, looked toward the distant hearth where the old woman sat. There was talk from the ceilidh. Someone was telling an old story. I recognized the rise and fall of the formal rhythms. I had heard Highlanders tell their stories and legends in Gaelic. In just that way, it sounded much the same. The mother nodded. Her sister went quickly down the length of the house. I didn't turn, but felt the stir of interest behind me as she passed the other hearths. Heads were turning, looking toward us. I kept my eyes on the boy's face, smiling, holding his hand tightly in my own. The sister's footsteps came softly behind me. The boy's mother reluctantly released her hold on him, leaving him to me. Permission had been received. Claire easily relocated the shoulder, with the boy surprised at the immediate relief from pain. He handed back the gemstone. Claire became aware of the ceilidh once more. Young Ian was singing off-key in Gaelic. The others joined in. Music transcended the barrier of language. Claire felt Tuak Tunyan, the pretty woman, watching her. She turned, and their eyes met. The pretty woman sent a young woman to summon Claire to her. "My grandmother asks if you will come to her." The young woman squatted beside me, speaking quietly in English. I was surprised, though not astonished, to hear it. Onakara had been right. Some of the Mohawk had some English. They would not use it, though, except from necessity, preferring their own language. I rose and accompanied her to Tawaktanyan's hearth, wondering what necessity impelled the pretty woman. I had my own necessities, the thought of Roger and of Brianna. The old woman nodded to me, inviting me to sit down, and spoke to the girl, not taking her eyes off me. My grandmother asks if she may see your medicine. Of course. I could see the old lady's eyes on my amulet, watching curiously as I took out the sapphire. I had added to Nyaweni's woodpecker feather 2 of my own, a raven's stiff black wing quills. You are the wife of Bear Killer? Yes. The Tuscarora call me White Raven, I said, and the girl jerked, startled. She translated quickly for her grandmother. The old lady's eyes flew wide and glanced at me in consternation. The young woman translated between Claire and her grandmother. The pretty woman asked about the opal. Claire showed it to them, and goose flesh rose on the elder woman's arms at the sight of the stone. The young woman asked how Claire procured the stone. Claire told them it came to her in a dream. The old woman then sang and rubbed tobacco over the fire. Claire could hear the men at the hearth in the distance and wondered if Roger could hear them too. The scent of smoke and tobacco jarred memories in Claire. She thought of battlefields and high school football games. The old woman asked Claire to tell her about the dream. I told her what I could, the memory of the storm and my refuge among the red cedar's roots, the skull buried with the stone, and the dream, the light on the mountain and the man with his face painted black, making no distinction between them. The old lady leaned forward, the astonishment on her features mirroring that of her granddaughter. You have seen the fire carrier? The girl blurted. You have seen his face? She shrank away from me, as though I might be dangerous. The old lady said something peremptory. Her startlement had faded into a piercing gaze of interest. She poked the girl and repeated her question impatiently. My grandmother says, can you say what he looked like? What did he wear? Nothing. A breechclout, I mean, and he was painted. Painted? How? The girl asked in response to her grandmother's sharp question. I described the body paint of the man I had seen as carefully as I could. This wasn't difficult. If I closed my eyes, I could see him as clearly as he had appeared to me on the mountainside. And his face was black from forehead to chin, I ended, opening my eyes. When I described the man, the interpreter became visibly upset. Her lips trembled, and she glanced fearfully from me to her grandmother. The old woman listened intently, though her eyes searching, straining to discern meaning from my face, before the slower words could reach her ears. The description disturbed the 2 women. The young woman translated the story that went back 40 years of the man Claire saw in her dream. His manner of speech was unusual, but he spoke their tongue. He was brave and tense and handsome. He only spoke of coming war and to kill all the white men, the Osirani, which is the Frenchmen, before it was too late. He told them of the British and French fighting each other in the future, and that was when they should strike to save their people. The man's name was Ottertooth, Taiwinio in Mohawk. And he told them they were short-sighted and lazy. He would not tell Pretty Woman how far in the future he could see. He tried to convince the tribe, but to no avail. He became more erratic and would not stop from returning with his message. Eventually, the men of the village decided to kill him because they believed he had an evil spirit within. He did not understand that he remained a stranger to the tribe, and he was in mortal danger. Claire noticed what was going on in the ceilidh, but her spine was prickling. Ottertooth looked like the Mohawk, sounded like them, but he was a stranger with fillings in his teeth. He hadn't understood because he believed they were his people and wanted to save them. They had meant to harm him, and did. They tortured his bare body, and he ran away. The warriors from the village followed behind, and after 4 days, they caught him. My brother, the war chief, was there. He told me afterward he was alone and unarmed. He had no choice, and knew it. But he faced them nonetheless, and he talked. Even after one of the men had struck him in the mouth with a war club, he talked through the blood, spitting out words with his broken teeth. He was a brave man, she said reflectively. He didn't beg. He told them the same things he had said before. But my brother said this time it was different. Before, he had been hot as fire, dying. He was cold as snow. And because they were so cold, his words terrified the warriors. Even when the stranger lay dead in the snow, his words seemed to go on ringing in the warriors' ears. They lay down to sleep, but his voice talked to them in their dreams and kept them from sleeping. You will be forgotten, he said. The nations of the Iroquois will be no more. No one will tell your stories. Everything you are and have been will be lost. They turned toward home, but his voice followed them. At night, they could not sleep for the evil words in their ears. In the day, they heard cries and whispers from the trees along their trail. Some of them said it was only ravens calling, but others said no. They heard him plainly. At last, my brother said it was clear this man was a sorcerer. The old lady glanced sharply at me. Je suis une sorcière, I'd said. I swallowed, and my hand went to the amulet at my neck. The thing to do, my brother said, was to cut off his head, and then he would talk no more. So they went back, and they cut off his head and tied it in the branches of a spruce. But when they slept that night, they still heard his voice, and they woke with shriveled hearts. The ravens had picked out his eyes, but the head still spoke. One man, very brave, said he would take the head and bury it far away. This brave man was my husband. He wrapped the head in a piece of deerskin, and he ran with it far to the south, and the head still talking under his arm all the time. So he had put plugs of beeswax in his ears, and at last he saw a very big red cedar tree, and he knew this was the place, because the red cedar had a strong spirit for healing. So he buried the head under the tree's roots, and when he took the beeswax from his ears, he could hear nothing but the wind and water. So he came home, and no one has spoken the name of Ottertooth in this village from that day until this one. The legend surrounding the opal was told to Claire. There is a legend, the girl said softly, not taking her eyes from the opal. Magic snakes carry stones in their heads. If you kill such a snake and take the stone, it will give you great power. She shifted uneasily, and I had no trouble imagining with her the size of the snake that might have carried a stone like this. Claire, who had always tried to disbelieve the supernatural, was certainly steeped in it. It was his, she said. He called it tikaba. I looked at the interpreter, but she shook her head. Tikaba, she said, enunciating clearly. This is not an English word? I shook my head. Her story finished, the old woman sat back in her furs, watching me with deep speculation. Her eyes rested on the amulet around my neck. Why did he speak to you? Why has he given you that? She nodded at my hand, and my fingers closed over the opal's curve in reflex. I don't know, I said. But she had taken me unaware. I had no time to prepare my face. She fixed me with a piercing look. She knew I was lying. All right. And yet, how could I tell her the truth? Tell her what Ottertooth, whatever his real name, had been, much less that his prophecies were true. I think perhaps he was part of my family, I said at last, thinking of what Pollyann had told me about the ghosts of one's ancestors. There was no telling from where or when he had come. He must, I supposed, be an ancestor or a descendant, if not of me, then of someone like me. The pretty woman sat up very straight at that and looked at me in astonishment. Slowly the look faded, and she nodded. "He has sent you to me to hear this. He was wrong," she declared with confidence. "My brother said that we must not speak of him. We must let him be forgotten. But a man is not forgotten as long as there are two people left under the sky, one to tell the story, the other to hear it. So..." She reached out and touched my hand, careful not to touch the stone. The glitter of moisture in her black eyes might have been from the tobacco smoke. "I am one. You are the other. He is not forgotten." After they ate and drank, Claire left the longhouse. Jamie was waiting for her outside. He thought progress had been made, and young Ian was right to throw the ceilidh. Claire looked at the longhouses, wondering where Roger was. It had been 7 months. Winter was ending, and they could get back to River Run in time for the birth. Jamie asked Claire if she learned anything about the opal. Claire said she would tell him inside their longhouse. The tikaba had been the man's ticket back to the future, if needed. It was now Claire's legacy. Whew, that's a lot to take in. We finally find out who the ghost was, exactly, though we thought he was probably a traveler because of the fillings. But now we know why. But he had walked Claire's shoes all the way back. He recognized her as a fellow traveler? As what? Somehow they were related because they all go back to Master Raymond, right? Fascinating. But it had been decades. He went back so much earlier, and they wouldn't believe him. Would you believe the future if someone came to you and said, "In 40 years, this is going to happen. I have the sight"? I don't know if any of us would believe it. Not really. It's so hard to see past where we are. And Claire, for all her "I'm only into science," she not only is surrounded by the supernatural, she participates in it. It is part of her. This is where Claire sometimes doesn't see herself in a self-reflective way, because it's complicated and nobody really understands it. So it's easier for her to separate herself from it rather than see herself as an integral part of it. But I love how the relationships grow within her and the Mohawk or the Tuscarora, those nations of the Iroquois. However it works out, that they are building friendships, and I like that within this section in the last chapter that we can see how they have to abide the culture of the tribe, of the village, and they understand what patience is. They don't just bully in there trying to get Roger back. They're marrying culture, where Jamie will shave every day because he's a hairy beast like a dog, like Roger, right? And they don't like body hair because they don't have body hair and it's weird to them. So they're working very hard to meet them where their culture is. But even a man who showed up, Ottertooth, speaking their language even though it sounded funny, looking like them, believing they were his people, they still never accepted him. And isn't that something that the priest had said? You are either them or you are other. Well, Ottertooth remained other. It is very difficult to actually be adopted in and to be them. There's a process and a ritual that has to take place, and they don't do it very often. There has to be a reason for it to happen. The other thing that I liked here is that they also understood, even though whiskey was really all they had to offer, that it was dangerous and risky to offer it. And listening to Emily and young Ian about having a tasting and showing that nothing horrible happened, that the exchange would likely move forward. Chapter 58, Lord John Returns, River Run, March, 1770. Phaedra brought a dress for Brianna to change into. A lord was coming for dinner, and Brianna had to hide her growing belly under heavy stays and flounce. Brianna wants to know who the lord is, but she wants nothing to do with the whalebone stays. "Don't need 'em," she said censoriously. "And you, with a 6-month belly, what you thinking of, girl? Coming to dinner all pooched out, and a lordship sitting by the soup a-goggling at you through his eyeglass." Brianna couldn't help smiling at this description, but replied with considerable dryness nonetheless. "What difference would it make? The whole county knows by now that I'm having a baby. I wouldn't be surprised if that circuit rider, Mr. Ermstone, is it, didn't preach a sermon about me up on the buttes." Phaedra uttered a short laugh. "He did," she said. "2 Sundays back, Mickey and Drusus was there. They thought it was right funny, but your auntie didn't. She set Lawyer Forbes on to law him for the slander. But old Reverend Ermstone, he said 'twasn't slander if it was the truth." Brianna stared back at the maid. "And just what did he say about me?" Phaedra shook her head and resumed her rummaging. "You don't want to know," she said darkly. "But be that as it might, whether the county knows ain't the same thing as you flaunting your belly through the dining room and leaving his lordship in no doubt. So you put on them stays." Oh, gotta love Phaedra. Gotta love that woman. The culture is completely foreign to Brianna and us, that if you were showing off your pregnant belly, whoo! I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was considered a no-no still. But in 2018, that is a huge cultural leap. And there are so many layers to it as well. It's not simply, it's a no-no. But even though people know, they might be vying for specific reasons to get her attention in hand. It's a game. It's a big cultural game. She allowed Phaedra to dress her even though she couldn't breathe, and she worried about the effects on the baby. The lord in question was none other than Lord John Grey of Mount Josiah Plantation in Virginia. "He a friend of your daddy's, so Miss Jo says," the maid added more prosaically. "There, that's good. Like you got nice bosoms. This dress is made for 'em." Brianna pondered this lord being a friend of her father's. When Brianna went down for dinner, there were a few familiar faces, but no Lord John Grey. Brianna entered the room without the whalebone stays and showed off her burgeoning belly. The group was polite, if not hiding the surprise at her improper dress. Lawyer Forbes entered the courting ring with a bang. He showed her 4 jewels and asked which she liked best. He was clever and would present her with one as an engagement ring if she gave her preference. Brianna's head swam in nausea spite. Precious gems could guarantee her passage back through the stones. Brianna knew the game Forbes was playing at and declined to say which she preferred. She wondered if she could steal the stones and run away. She could hide in the mountains and wait to hear of her parents' return, or go straight to Wilmington and a ship to the West Indies. Forbes asked her again which she preferred, and she declined under the guise of having simple tastes. Jocasta wanted dinner to proceed, even though Lord John hadn't arrived. Just then Ulysses announced the visitor. He was to sit next to Brianna at dinner. Brianna was surprised by Lord John's stature. Her mother had never described it, only his jobs and attributes. He was slight, delicately boned, with beautiful eyes, and half a foot shorter. And near half a foot shorter. He startled at the sight of her, of course. She knows not why. He quickly turned on the charm and clever anecdotes, but he never mentioned her father. Brianna was tired of the well-meaning visitors. She wanted to be left alone. She realized, though, they were Scots, and could never leave her alone in her current situation. Jocasta was fond of her, but clearly had made up her mind that it would be foolish to wait. Why sacrifice the chance of a good, solid, respectable marriage to a will-o'-the-wisp hope of love? The horrible thing was that she knew herself it was foolish to wait. Of all the things she had been trying not to think of for weeks, this was the worst. And here it was, rising up in her mind like the shadow of a dead tree, stark against snow. If they came back. If her parents came back at all, Roger would not be with them. She knew it. They wouldn't find the Indians who had taken him. How could they, in a trackless wilderness of snow and mud? Or they would find the Indians only to learn that Roger was dead, of injuries, disease, torture. Or he would be found alive and refuse to come back, not wanting to see her ever again. Or he would come back with that maddening sense of Scottish honor, determined to take her but hating her for it. Or would he come back, see the baby, or none of them would come back at all. I will bring him home to you, or I will not come home myself. And she would live hers alone forever, drowned in the waves of her own guilt, her body bobbing in the swirl of good intentions, anchored by a rotting umbilical cord to the child whose dead weight had pulled her under. Miss Fraser, are you quite well then? Not very, no, she said. I think I'm going to faint. And she did, shaking the table with a crash as she fell forward into a whirling sea of china and white linen. I think that Brianna has allowed herself, or not allowed herself, rather, to really think about the scope of things, or the timing and how far pregnant she was. 6 months pregnant, she's getting on, right? There's not a lot of time left. And she doesn't know what to do, and she's trying to prepare herself for all the things and the worst. But she doesn't know. It's all smoke and mirrors. Brianna woke to find herself on a sofa being tended to by many. Once they left her alone, she wanted to cry, but she couldn't. She decided in her stubbornness that they were all coming back to her. That was that, and her half-Scottishness couldn't believe anything else. Jocasta came in with Ulysses and Lord John, and of course tea. Jocasta offered to call Dr. Fentonman, but Brianna vehemently declined. Remember, he's the guy who just likes to bloodlet everybody? That dirty flame? Ugh. Lord John wished to speak to her since he was leaving in the morning. After leaving the tray, Jocasta and Ulysses left them to chat. Lord John inquired after her well-being. Are you truly well, Miss Fraser? I have no desire to see you prostrate among the teacups. A smile pulled at the corner of his mouth, and she flushed. I'm fine, she said shortly. Did you have something to say to me? He wasn't taken aback by her abruptness. Yes, but I thought perhaps you would prefer that I not mention it in the midst of the company. I understand that you are interested in the whereabouts of a man named Roger Wakefield. She had been feeling fine. At this, the wave of faintness threatened to return. Yes? How do you know where he is? No. He saw her face change and took her hand between his. No, I am sorry. Your father had written to me some 3 months ago, asking me to assist him in finding this man. It had occurred to him that if Mr. Wakefield was anywhere in the ports, he might have been taken up by a press gang, and thus be now at sea in one of His Majesty's ships. He asked if I would make use of my acquaintance in naval circles to determine whether such a fate had in fact befallen Mr. Wakefield. Brianna told him Roger wasn't on a ship. He kept talking and planned to travel to Wilmington to make more inquiries. Brianna told him he didn't have to go. "You don't need to go. I know where he is." In as few words as possible, she acquainted him with the basic facts. Jamie, your father, that is, your parents, have gone to rescue this man from the Iroquois? Looking shaken, he turned and poured 2 cups of tea, handing her one without asking if she wanted it. She held it between her hands, finding a small comfort in the warmth, a greater comfort in being able to speak frankly to Lord John. "Yes, I wanted to go with them, but—" "Yes, I see." He glanced at her bulge and coughed. "I collect there's some urgency in finding Mr. Wakefield." How could anyone not adore Lord John? She went on to ask him if he knows what hand-fasting was and if it was legal in the colony of North Carolina. He didn't know but would find out. Brianna believed she was married, but Jocasta did not, hence her many attempts to find her a husband. Brianna thought he was the latest candidate when he showed up. Lord John now understood why the odd company was assembled for dinner. John explained to Brianna what Judge Alderdice's mother had in mind. "Ah, well, while I admire the boldness of your strategy, Miss Fraser, may I call you my dear? I regret to inform you that your tactics do not suit the terrain upon which you've chosen to employ them." "What do you mean by that?" He leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, surveying her kindly. "Mrs. Alderdice, not being blind, though by no means as astute as your aunt, I did indeed observe her observing you. But you mistake the nature of her observations, I'm afraid." He shook his head, looking at her over the rim of his glass as he sipped. "Not the look of outraged respectability by any means. It's granny lust." Brianna sat up straight. "It's what?" "Granny lust," he repeated. He sat up himself and topped his glass, pouring the golden liquid carefully. "You know, an elderly woman's urgent desire for grandchildren to dandle upon her knee, spoil with sweetmeats and generally corrupt." He raised his glass to his nose and reverently breathed in the vapors. "Oh, Ambrosia, I haven't had a decent sherry in 2 years, at least." "What you mean, Mrs. Alderdice thinks that I mean, because I've shown that I can have children, then she's sure to get grandchildren out of me later on? That's ridiculous. The judge could pick any healthy girl of good character," she added bitterly, "and be fairly sure of having children by her." He took a drink, let it drift across his tongue and swallowed, relishing the final ghost of the taste before answering. "Well, no. I rather think that she realizes he could not, or would not. It makes no difference." He looked at her directly, pale blue eyes unblinking. "You said it yourself. He is 40 and unmarried." "You mean but he's a judge." The moment her horrified exclamation came out, she realized the idiocy of it and clapped a hand over her mouth, blushing furiously. Lord John laughed, though with a wry edge to it. "The more certainly, therefore," he said, "you are quite right. He could have his choice of any girl in the county. If he has not so chosen," he paused delicately, then lifted his glass to her in ironic toast, "I rather think that Mrs. Alderdice has realized her son's marriage to you is her best, possibly her only, expectation of having the grandchild she so ardently desires." "Oh, yes. Frank for Frank, Boldness for boldness in speech." Lord John saw Brianna as blunt as her mother and full of honor like her father. Brianna's ire rose at the idea of her father's honor. "Don't talk to me about my father's honor," she said sharply. "He's who's got me into this mess." His eyes dropped to her waistline, frankly ironical. "You shock me," he said politely, seeming not shocked at all. She felt the blood surge up in her face once more, hotter than before. "You know perfectly well that's not what I mean." He hid a smile in his sherry cup, eyes crinkling at her. "My apologies, Miss Fraser. What did you mean then?" She took a deep sip of tea to cover her confusion and felt the comforting heat run down her throat and into her chest. "I mean, this particular mess being put on show like a piece of bloodstock with doubtful lines, being held up by the scruff of the neck like an orphaned kitten in hopes somebody will take me in, being left alone here in the first place." She ended, her voice trembling unexpectedly. "Why are you alone here?" Lord John asked, quite gently. "I should have thought that your mother might have." "She wanted to. I wouldn't let her. Because she had to. That is, he. Oh, it's all such a fucking mess." She dropped her head into her hands and stared wretchedly at the tabletop, not crying, but not far from it either. At that, Lord John decided he would stay on at River Run, and they would speak again. There's so much whirling in my mind about the village, the negotiation, young Ian's relationship with the young woman, Claire's conversation with the pretty woman, and all that was revealed. Claire was right that Ottertooth had tried to save his people from the future. He was a traveler like her. He was her people, too. Hopefully, in 3 days, Roger would be in their hands and headed back to River Run in time for the birth. Lord John showing up at River Run had shocked Brianna because she thought he was a suitor, like all the other men. But he was only trying to fulfill her father's task of finding her young man. His humor, charm, and kindness drew her in. It looked like friendship and alliance was forming between them. Oh, he's so funny. He's so funny. I love Lord John. People who don't like him, I think they gloss over his character. Even if you don't read all the Lord John books or The Scottish Prisoner, I don't know how you can't fall in love with him. He's just amazing. And he has a wicked humor, and he's a smaller man with a giant ferocity and personality, with the same deep honor and protective nature as Jamie, and of his family and of his name and those he loves. I can't wait till next week because we're going to be doing the blackmail chapter. That's always a good one. And then we get the resolution to Roger as well. Wow. So I think some Outlander news this week. The biggest thing is that Tobias cannot go to the New Jersey convention as planned. Tobias Menzies, that is. And because of filming, he is on the Crown. So that was a great disappointment to people, and to him as well, I'm sure. He is really gracious with fans. He's a really good guy from all accounts. And I did get an email from Meredith, so I'm going to read it, from Everett, Washington. Dear Desiree, I'm sure you'll agree that whenever Lord John makes an appearance, it is always accompanied by witty humor. That's one element of Grey that David Barry has been able to express, his witty sense of humor. It's hardly his fault, though, since he hasn't been given the material. I hope that Season 4 gives him a better chance to shine. I'm really looking forward to seeing Barry and Skelton together. I'm curious about Brianna's discovery of John's secrets. I didn't think it quite worked in the book. I know he often travels with his own cook. Maybe if she saw them together. I have no idea how the writer's room tackled that. We shall see. So this next portion of her email I'm going to wait to read next week because it applies to chapter 59. So I'm going to stop there And thank you, Meredith, for sending me an email. And yes, this is where things kind of get explosive coming up, crazy. And I absolutely understand the cultural conflict, why they're trying to get her married. You have to step back from our viewpoint in the 21st century. You have to step out of the 20th century and say, but, because what happens in 200 years when somebody's reading about our time, that we were alive, they're going to see so much insane stuff. Like, they're just not even going to understand why people flipped out on social media when they weren't even in person with each other, why there was so much burden to overly share, etc., in the realm of social media, to have so little in-person life. That why? They're going to wonder why people were so lonely even though they could be connected to so many at once. I mean, there's going to be a lot of questions about our culture and the things that we did and the choices we made socially, legally, etc. Why did we do it? And we're sitting in the midst of it, so some of it's difficult to see, but if I try and step out of it and look at it as somebody who's a historian, it's going to be mind-bending. Like, I can't even imagine what the conclusions about us are going to be and about what we did. We have no idea. So we have to remember to look at them very contextually as to why and when. And one of the things I did do, and I can't remember if I told you or not, so I'm going to say it again, is look up the language of the time. And yes, those in the colonies much more sounded like what we sound like here than what modern British accents sound like. Those evolved in the varying parts of England, and they didn't sound that way at all. So every single period piece that everyone sounds proper English as we think of it, the London, South England accent, as like the standard American accent that doesn't really sound like from anywhere, that didn't exist then, and it evolved after the separation from the colonies, and we were different countries and did not have that vast communication anymore. So that's really interesting. Go look it up. I couldn't find any sound clips really of what people would have sounded like. I'm sure they're out there somewhere, but I haven't been able to find them. So if you can find sound clips of what historians, those who study language, believe people sounded like, that would be awesome. And if they've made recordings of what it might have sounded like. So I was having a difficult time really finding anything of value, except they don't sound like the English accent of London, like people think everyone sounds like. Anyhow. And so the Southern accent that we know evolved directly from that. And I know there is a small town that's been pretty isolated, and the people from one particular area have lived there since the early 1600s, and they sound very similar to what they sounded like originally because they stayed there. It didn't have a lot of influx from other people. So, amazing. I love that. So now we're left with what's going to happen to the priest. Is the whiskey enough to get Roger? What's going to happen to Brianna? What's this whole new relationship development with Lord John? Because Brianna doesn't know any history between John and Jamie at all. She doesn't know anything except what Claire's told her, which was very minimalistic. So, is Roger going to come back? What's Aunt Jocasta going to do? I mean, right now, the home kit and caboodle farm is Brianna's in the will. So, this should be really fun to unravel, right? So, again, we're doing chapters 59 and 60 next. And I want to hear from you guys. I want your comments, questions, thoughts, ideas. 719-425-9444 or contact@adramaofoutlander.com. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me give your insights. I'm only me. I mean, I know these books pretty well, but every time I read them again, I find something new and see that web of a network. But reading Diana's stuff for how long now? 27 years? Yeah, 27 years. It still is revealing itself over time. She writes in such a fascinating way. Like, I can see it in my head, but I certainly could never write that way. I don't understand it in the sense of my own processes, but I can see the sphere and how it all connects, and it's bizarre in my head. And I think she's probably has a very high IQ. She's super brilliant, and her process is fascinating to me when she talks about it. And I really love when she talks about that process, when she says the characters speak to her. And I get that. Like, they tell her where they're going. They tell her who they are. And she says, okay, eventually, even if she tries to fit them somewhere, if they don't fit, she just stops trying to fit them. And then she figures out how they fit, not why. Or why, but she doesn't try to force them into something different. And that's how we get who we have. That's how we get a 20th century woman in the 18th century and time travel. It's so good. It's so, so good. Anyway, how can you help the podcast? You can help the podcast by sharing it, going onto Facebook and following the A Dram of Outlander page, or joining the A Dram of Outlander community group. You have to answer 3 questions so we know that you're real and not a bot. You're not some mean person coming in to infiltrate our nice, happy space. Go and engage with each other. Post content. Come along. It's a good place, trust me. Fights don't break out. People rarely have to be moderated. There's not mean-spiritedness. It's just a really great group of, I think, bright, intelligent people who really do want to communicate, and they want to just talk to each other and be in a kind place, right? And we don't have to agree to be kind. That has been lost in our culture. People have completely lost their minds that disagreement means hate, or etc., etc., etc. It does not. It absolutely doesn't. And it doesn't matter what you believe science says, what experts prove. People are not going to believe the same things. They're not going to live the same way. And creating that space to appreciate, respect, and be kind is all that's required. You never have to agree with somebody. And on social media, you know what the beauty is? You can block or unfriend somebody at any moment. They don't have to be in your space if they are being mean and terrible. So we have lost our ability to have discourse and to properly argue. I say that in air quotes. You can't see me, of course, but I just did that. And I say that because people don't know how to debate anymore. They don't know how to ask questions and get answers and talk to each other and really get to the heart of something. It's all surface. Gaslighting. If somebody says something that you don't like, you call them phobic. You call them hateful. You call them a bigot. It's true. It's really disturbing. And I don't think it happens as much in person, but behind the phone, the tablet, the computer, it happens daily. It's horrendous. And it's creating fires and discord. And I don't think there's as much discord as this small group of very vocally violent people, I will say. Because it's aggressive. And it's like getting hit in the face with a punch. We're not like that on any of the A Dram of Outlander places. people can actually talk and not agree and bring their own perspectives and look at this. And we've covered some pretty heady topics over the course of these last many weeks. I mean, abortion, physician-assisted suicide, what about adoption, honor, what do relationships mean? I mean, we've covered a lot. And yet, we've had good discourse. And no fistfights have broken out yet. Okay, so you can also go to Twitter and Instagram and follow, but there's no A in front. It's just Dram of Outlander. And of course, the website is adramofoutlander.com. I know, super surprising and shocking. There's a couple of things I want to ask of you guys. Hopefully you're still listening at this mark and you haven't turned it off yet. One, I would like a new intro. I want you to help me design a new intro. This one is tired. I need to get rid of it and I want something more. But because I've been doing it for so many episodes now, so many weeks, I can't quite get it out of my head to try and write something else. So I would love your ideas. You can email them to me. Again, contact@adramofoutlander.com. You can leave a voicemail, 719-425-9444. You can leave it on the Facebook page or group. You can leave it to me on Twitter. I'm trying to find something new. That's all. That really describes this podcast specifically. And I'm having a hard time coming up with the adjectives and the sentence for it. The next thing I need help with is if there's something I do on the podcast that you really like, that little quip, tell me at the starting number and ending number what it is, and I will clip that out and I will post that specifically by itself for other people to hear, because it might drive some interest to the podcast for people who've never listened. I am the only solo podcaster about Outlander. I'm not part of a team or a group. It's just me. And I'm sort of creating this in my own little vacuum. So I need your help in improving it, moving it forward, and just making it more interesting. So yes, any little clips that you really like that I do, tell me the start time and the end time and I'll clip it out. It takes me a few minutes. Again, I want to say thank you to Jan and Patricia for coming onto the page and group and being moderators and to help me out, just move content, talk to you guys, create some extra flow. And you can contact any one of us and give us ideas for things that you would like to do in the group, any sort of fun things, anything. Let me know. Because I want this to be something where we just have a good community and really grow some friendships and have fun in the context of the world of Outlander. Because it is super fun and we all keep coming back for more. The last way that you can help podcast. Second to last way. Second to last way is you can go through Apple Podcasts into iTunes and leave a rating. For every 5-star rating, it helps bring people in. So if you like it, please go over there and give me 5 stars. Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, please go in and review. Because it helps people find me. Be awesome. And, I almost forgot. The other thing I would like to do is to be able to have some merch for fun, like t-shirts or stickers, stuff like that, bookmarks, whatever. But we need to come up with our own sayings and phrasings that are unique to a Dram of Outlander. They cannot belong to Sony Outlander or Diana. So if there's anything that you can think of that would be really fun that you'd want to see on a t-shirt or a shot glass, I think shot glasses, obviously, because a dram. But what else? What other kind of fun little things can you think of that you would like to see or to have me give away? I'd like to know. But the final way you can support the podcast, I know, yam. I've been talking about this for like 8 minutes, is financially. I'm a solo person doing all the front end and back end by myself and supporting the podcast. I have a few of you who have pledged monthly, which is always helpful. Every little thing I do costs money, just for maintenance and upkeep, right? And patreon.com/a dram of Outlander is a way that you can do a monthly pledge, including down to $1 a month. Every dollar counts. Trust me, every single one. But if you'd like to send me a one-time offering, you just email me or leave a voice message and I will tell you how to do that. And that's always appreciated. And that's it. I think we made it. Thank you for listening and coming with me these many weeks. We're now quickly moving to the end of this book. And I have enjoyed every minute of it. Some of it was a little bit of an uphill, it was hard. And there's some parts that just literally punch you in the face, right? Or you see them coming and want to run away. But we did it. Conflict makes good character growth. And that's one of the things that Diana has said, and it's not verbatim, that basically you get to see and know who characters are through the difficulties and challenges that they face and get through. That you really get to see their salt. And I agree with her. Even though sometimes it could be a little more calm, because then I couldn't live that world. I would be playing Jenny Murray at Lollybrook. I would stay. I don't want to do all this adventuring. I would be their friend, their best friend, but they could come and stay at my house whenever they were around. But I couldn't live the crazy Jamie and Claire life. It's a little bit too much for me, personally. Anyway, I hope you have a fantastic week until we meet again. And until next time, slán je va.